Hello content creators. In this video, I will show you how I turned this light stand, tripod with camera arm, and step stool cooking studio setup into this compact all-in-one mobile light, camera, and monitor tabletop studio setup for my cooking channel. The difference between this setup and other setups in other videos is the fact that this Origami folding kitchen cart is neither a table nor a desk with a ledge. This is a tabletop without a ledge onto which I could attach any clamp which comes with most, if not all, accessory equipment. As you can see in the video, there is a skirt of wood around the tabletop, which is very thin. It is totally adequate for its purpose, but not for what I eventually intend to use the tabletop for. So I decided to take the actual measurements to see what I was working with and verify my initial observations. At first, I thought I would cut a piece of wood to place underneath the tabletop to extend the skirt. However, the measurements, as seen in the video, showed that the thickness of the skirt was only 115/128ths of an inch, too thin to support a clamp. The thickness of the skirt was not the biggest problem, because the next measurement would definitely change my original plans. The height of the table at 2 61/64 inches was too tall for the clamps, once again clearly seen in the video. Because this is a cooking setup, I did not want to modify the tabletop in any way. No holes would be drilled into the wood, holes in which particles of food or whatever can fall into and contaminate the tabletop surface. Additionally, I expected to use this Origami tabletop for other purposes in the future. As you can see here, when I prepare and cook the meals, I have to stand behind both part of the camera tripod and the light stand with my head in between the lights. My arms have to reach beneath the light's arms and around the light pole to effectively work on the tabletop to produce the video. Here I am just going to turn the tabletop around in a different position, and even at the 4x fast forwarded speed, you can see how difficult this is because of the size of the tripod legs, the light stand placement, and the step stool with the monitor on it, having to be placed in a position where I can visually view the entire picture. I must line everything back up and attempt to refine the exact camera angle in order to make it seem as if there were no changes. Then I come back and take my place behind the light stand in a position where only my hands are visible in the camera shot. Because I wanted to be able to move this setup between my kitchen and my dining room, I needed to have this compact, mobile, lights, camera, monitor setup as soon as possible. So I had to figure out another way to attach the camera, monitor, and lights to this tabletop. These heavy-duty clamps and vise clamps are what I use to attach the monitor arm and the camera arm to the tabletop. They may seem like overkill, but because of the monitor weight and longer monitor arm, I felt that they were absolutely necessary to safeguard the connection with the tabletop, especially because this entire setup will be rolled and or rolling from one place to another. Pictured here is all of the equipment I used to attach the camera arm to the tabletop. The arm itself, 2 vice grip vice clamps, and a small strip of bicycle inner tube to prevent a metal-on-metal contact point. The inner tube strip being used to avoid stripping any of the metals of their protective coatings to avoid any rusting issues. This connection was far easier to do than the monitor arm and its various adapters and adapter adaptations. Amazon pictures from their website for each product are shown. These are all of the pieces of equipment I used to turn a single arm monitor post into a double arm post with 2 arms of different lengths. I did use extra long store-bought screws in place of some of the screws which came with the adapters, as well as plumbing faucet washers to be used as spacers within the connections between the adapters. Because they are longer and have nuts to secure them, it gives me more time to notice if any of them become loose from the vibrations caused by the movement of the tabletop. It may look like a lot, but all of this is necessary to create this setup properly and safely. As you can see in the Amazon pictures, I did spend some money to make this build happen, but only after months of thought and research. Of course, how each piece is used will be explained further in the video. There is a circular permanent base which I will only be using as a leveling piece for the clamp. The standard monitor adapters, a brand-specific monitor adapter, as well as a single-post monitor adapter which will hold the lighting pole. And finally, there is the longer monitor arm which was bought separately to allow the monitor to be further away from the oil and splattering from the tabletop when cooking. In the next 2 or so minutes, I will briefly describe to you my tripod, the Sunpack Platinum Plus Ultra 7500 TM. It is a large heavy-duty tripod with a height of 72 to 75 inches. As you can see, I also use an ALZO horizontal armbar camera mount for overhead videography. On the end of the camera mount bar is a 360-degree mini ball camera head. The entire ball mount is sitting on top of a NEEWER 360-degree metal gimbal panoramic tripod head, which has a 15-kilogram, 33-pound camera weight capacity. I bought the older version. Pictured is a newer as in new versus old, a newer version of the same product. This setup allows the camera to see over my shoulder and look down upon the table. There is also a monopole, which, as you can see in this specific setup, is actually taller than I am. I have used this equipment to record many graduations and a wedding with excellent results. Now this is my light stand, which I will definitely be including in my new compact mobile tabletop setup. It is the Sebider, S-E-B-I-D-E-R, or Sebider, basically dual LED 10-inch ring light with tripod stand and phone holder. These are really useful and versatile lights. They of course provide more light than a single light system, the metal arms allowing you to move the lights into many different positions for nearly every situation you can imagine from 2 different angles at once. Because of this lighting system, I did not have to buy additional lighting. I will now begin the hardest part of this build, attaching the monitor mount to the tabletop using the provided parts, adapters, and additional pieces of equipment pictured on the screen. In order to keep this video shorter, the footage will be fast-forwarded for most parts. Here you can see the tabletop sitting on the metal understructure and frame which supports it. I had to avoid these metal parts when creating a new attachment configuration. The braces gave me an idea as to how to connect the monitor to the tabletop, as you will see. The depth of the clamps also made clamping to the tabletop easier, despite the skirt which surrounds the edge of the tabletop. During certain phases of the build, I may not say much, allowing the video to speak for me. Simply imitate what I have done and you should be able to achieve the same result. Of course, you can always slow the video down in order to see the exact steps I have taken. Here, you can see how I positioned the medium-sized clamp to attach the mount to the tabletop. However, because of the frame beneath the tabletop, there was only one way to attach the clamp where the framing was located. As you can see in the video, this position makes turning the handle more difficult for my hands, so I decided to use the end of the tabletop without the framing present for the monitor mount. The camera arm can be mounted in either position as shown in the video. This is the position I decided for the pole mount. I used the right angle of the thick metal base to increase the strength of the connection. The bend in the metal allows both the tabletop and skirt to share the load and lateral stresses placed on the wood. However, in order to visualize the pole mount setup, I decided to use the smaller clamps to temporarily create the monitor setup without actually attaching the heavy monitor and lights. It would turn out to be a good idea, as I would realize just how much stress would be placed on the clamps and especially how much bigger the longer arm would turn out to be. This meant that there would be much greater leverage and lateral tension on the entire connection. Not only that, I realized that I needed to use the drilled hole base attachment and a large diameter washer to equalize the height of one side of the clamp so that it sat evenly with the mount base. As you can see in the video, the dual connection was very strong indeed, even when using the smallest and medium clamps, strong enough to lift the entire tabletop up with ease. This is a very well-built pole and base mount system. Because it was difficult to turn the handle of the smallest clamp, I decided to replace it with a vise clamp instead. This is also why I did not use the smallest clamp in the build. I didn't think it would be as sufficient as the larger clamps, even temporarily. It probably was, but I took no chances. I also still shook and tested the hell out of that connection as well. With the pole mount in place, I turned my attention to the monitor arms. This is the original monitor arm which came with the monitor mount kit. I already knew that this original arm would be unacceptable to use, as it would place the monitor too close to the tabletop, as well as being too close to the heat coming from the top of the griddle when it was opened during cooking. You can clearly see that there is literally no space between the arm and the griddle top when it is opened. So I decided to buy the longer arm with an extra piece to move the rest of that arm backwards away from the tabletop to avoid any heating and splatter issues. It would also make it easier to view the monitor when the griddle top is in an upright position. Upon placing the longer arm in place, it became obvious that this was an extremely big arm, more than just a third longer than the original as I previously thought. However, it worked as planned and placed the monitor about 11 inches away from the back of the tabletop. As you can see in the video, the longer arm will somewhat protect the monitor screen from the cooking area. From every angle, it seemed to be perfect. However, the size and extra length of the longer arm made me decide to use the original arm to hold the entire lights pole in a way that counterbalances the weight of the monitor. This forced me to have to create an innovative way to hold the entire light pole system minus the legs and yet place it above the tabletop in a position to be effective as lighting, off camera and out of my way as I prepared and cooked the meals. Here you can see the difference in the length of the two arms. The extra length is why I used the heavier clamps in the two different positions to attach the mount to the tabletop. It is also why I decided to use the whole light system as a partial counterbalance to the weight of the monitor on the longer arm. So after seeing how much bigger the longer arm was than the original arm, I decided to attach the pole mount with the bigger clamps as it would actually be when in use. The stress from the extra length of the longer arm with the weight of the monitor on it kind of scared me a little. However, I was totally confident that the larger clamps would suffice. The position of the larger clamp is critical to not allowing the mount base to move, even the slightest amount. I also hoped that the lighting arm setup would offset the weight of the monitor, even if just a little bit. With the final clamps in place, I decided to test the connection a couple of times by putting some of my weight on the connection. It looked good to me, as the next step is to attach the monitor to the longer arm. Again, that is a really long arm. So now comes the part where I attach the monitor to the longer arm, and, as would have it, that required the first of many specific adapters that I would have to use for this build. My monitor did not have the standard screw mount area for most monitors. Yeah, okay. So I had to purchase an adapter specifically for HP monitors. I used this particular monitor because it lost lighting on the left side of the screen, rendering it useless as a monitor but perfect for this experiment. So I unclamped the monitor stand and clamped on the HP specific adapter. Both the attachment part and the clip inside were made of plastic, so I'm not too sure how long this adapter will last. Especially being attached to the end of a long arm attached to a pole mount, which is itself clamped to a mobile tabletop, which will obviously vibrate as it moves. Replacing this monitor with one with the standard screw mount will be my first objective. I followed the directions and attached the HP specific adapter to the original standard monitor adapter with the included screws. However, I did choose not to use all of the washers because I thought they did not allow enough of the screw to pass through both adapters to my liking. Once again, I will be replacing these standard screws with the longer screws I showed you earlier in this video. Were this just going to be a stationary build on a stationary desk, then this would totally work. However, again, this is a mobile tabletop and will be bouncing along and vibrating as it moves. These little screws can easily come loose while also being out of sight. Failure to maintain connection will definitely result in the loss of my equipment. This is no fault of the vendors. It is up to me to protect any equipment that I use in a way in which it was not designed to be used. These 1/4 by 20 by 1 inch screws with nuts should secure everything together. I used 2 nuts to be safe, believing that the double nuts should give me a warning sign that they have come loose. That warning sign is one of the nuts falling to the floor, telling me that they have loosened, and that will be a good time to check all connections. The hope is that I will hear any nut that falls to the ground and finding it to put it back on. With the adapters now screwed together, I unclicked the monitor from its original base and locked the now prepared HP monitor adapter to the back of the monitor itself. I then moved the first section of the longer monitor arm into the backwards position, which would move the monitor screen at least 11 inches from the tabletop, then bending the other 2 sections of the arm as if it was in the same position the original arm would be. Using that extra section as I plan to project backwards, providing clearance from the tabletop, is what makes this build sensible. After securing or screwing the monitor to the arm, I tested the entire monitor setup from every angle to make sure it would be adequate to protect the plastic screen from the heat of the hot griddle top when using. With the pole mount and monitor arm in place, it was time to do the easiest part of this build, attaching the camera mount to the tabletop. As seen earlier in the video, the tabletop is too tall for the camera arm clamp, so I had to figure out another way to attach the camera mount base. In this position, I attach the base to where the frame is located using the C-clamps. They could slide between the frame and clamp the base to the skirt of the tabletop. I just had to fiddle with them a bit to angle them correctly to make them fit. In order to avoid scratching the base metal, I used a small piece of a bicycle inner tube as a buffer between the clamp metal and the metal of the base itself. I also decided to use 2 C-clamps to make sure that between the 2 of them, they could handle any sideways forces acting on the base. Unlike the monitor base mount, this base would be attached to only one surface of the tabletop, meaning it needs more support than just what one clamp can provide. One clamp would allow the base to slide either forward or backwards. 2 clamps avoid this issue by applying force to both sides of the base attachment point, negating the forward and or backward force acting on the base mount. It did take some finagling to find the right spots, but this worked out perfectly. As you can see, the mounts, bases, and arm positions are coming together as I hoped. The only thing left to do was to check the final positions and place the griddle upon the tabletop to verify the final positioning. I adjusted the camera arm to a position where the ball head would be in the center of the front of the table. I then made a preliminary test to verify the clearance of all of the arms and base mounts. After that, I placed the griddle on the tabletop in the position it would be when I'm using it. Lifting the griddle top, I checked all clearances again from all angles to make sure everything was in a good placement. The last thing I wanted to do now was to have to unscrew and remove, then replace any of the base mounts into another position, reconnecting them with the tabletop. So now we will move on to the most creative part of this build, adapting the dual LED lighting system to the tabletop using multiple adapters. However, this could only be accomplished by removing the legs from the lighting system entirely. I took measurements of the lighting system main pole to see if I could use one of its poles inside of the mounting brackets of the monitor pole adapter. I actually did this long before I started the build. However, I am including this footage to show you what I had to do and how close the measurements were to making this build not work. This Vivo steel universal bracket mount with the standard 75mm and 100mm plates is the mount I bought to hold the pole of the lighting system over the tabletop. It was, in my opinion, the strongest and safest way to attach the pole to the tabletop. However, when I measured the smallest pole in the lighting pole stand in order to verify its diameter, the measurements were too small. The Vivo brackets required a minimum size of 1.1 inches in diameter. Pole 1 was too small. Pole 2 was too small, but luckily, pole 3 was just barely large enough in diameter to be used within the brackets of this system. I also purchased this Vivo Universal VESA ball head adapter just in case the lighting pole mounting idea did not work. This ball head adapter is designed to mount to the plate of a monitor adapter. The ball head adapter speaks for itself. Some customers who bought this item have complained about the lack of clearance between the handle and the mount itself. Though I agree with that perception, it does not really stop you from using this device. It is close, but still doable. And by being able to give you multiple options with a monitor mount adapter, I found it useful indeed. In this view, I show you a close-up, top-down view of the brackets which lock around the pole of the table mount system. Because of how they can be pulled apart, these brackets can be attached to a pole where its ends are not accessible as seen here. This is how the adapter with the brackets is supposed to work. Just slide it down the pole of the mount. My idea was to simply slide the main lighting stand pole into the brackets and tighten to secure the pole in place. Before I put everything together, I decided to use my hands to hold the brackets tightly around the different segments of the lighting pole to make sure that the largest segment was big enough to be used within the brackets securely. As you can see, the screws are very long, which is comforting knowing that this system will be bouncing along as I move it between my kitchen and dining room. The open design of these brackets allows this system to be placed around any suitably sized pole to mount a monitor or whatever you may choose. You can use it the way I did or make up something unique of your own personal design. Just remember to not exceed the weight limitations. So the next step was to find and remove the single bolt holding the main telescopic stand inside of the legs assembly. Be mindful to find a secure place to store this screw so that you can replace it when the need to use the entire light stand arises. So I put the brackets back together with the nuts screwed on to test the brackets hold onto the telescopic light pole assembly. This was just a hand-tightened test to provide to myself a visual representation of how the bracket adapter would look when attached to the entire arm assembly. It looked good to me, although I had the arm attachment upside down in the video. Little mistakes like this have to be caught early before you make any final connections. You do not want to have to unassemble that which you just painstakingly assembled. Many of these parts and adapters look surprisingly similar from every angle, but there is definitely an up and down to all of this equipment, so pay attention. In this part of the video, I thought I could use the Vivo Universal VESA ball head adapter to hold my camcorder instead of the light itself. So I unscrew the ball head itself from the rest of the adapter. Once again, make sure that you secure all screws you take off of a part in a small bag. That small bag is then taped to the part so you do not lose that particular screw or screws. The last thing you want to do is to lose the screws, forcing you to have to find a replacement which may not allow the part to work properly as originally designed. After putting the parts of the adapter that I was not going to use back into its original boxing, I turned my attention to how I was going to mount the VESA plate of the brackets adapter to the monitor arm adapter plate, an adapter to adapter connection. Though not designed to be used this way, I have to make this work in order for me to complete my build in the manner I desired. To do this required extra nuts, bolts, and washers. After setting out the longer bolts, washers, and nuts that I would use to replace the smaller screws that came with the adapter, I decided to hold the pieces together one more time to visualize the entire lighting pole mounting assembly. And of course, I had one of the adapter plates upside down. I corrected that only to then realize that I had the brackets on the pole the wrong direction. Okay. So I fixed everything in the right position to prepare to finalize the setup. As you can see in the video, the pieces do look the same from every position. Always check before you screw anything together. The reason I had to use longer bolts to secure the two adapters is because the supplied screws were designed to screw into the back of the monitor. In my build, the screws would have to screw into another adapter. I wanted to secure the original screws with some nuts that I supplied myself, but the distance from the nut to the end of the screw was way too short for my liking. If the nut came loose, it could easily fall and disappear somewhere while I would be moving the entire tabletop build. This would lead to a rapid and catastrophic fall of the lighting assembly. So I had to use longer bolts with nuts. In order to absorb some of the vibration of the movement of the tabletop, I used plumbing washers to place in between the adapter plates. In the video, you can see me use just one of the original screws to demonstrate how I wanted to use the original screws with the plumbing washers and how short the distance to the end of the screw is. However, my intuition told me that these screws were not going to be safe to use. I have seen this type of setup fail before, and the longer bolts would indeed be a better choice. so I began the tedious job of securing one adapter plate to the other with the plumbing washers in between. In this side view, you can see how and why I did this. Screwing the bolts and nuts on is a chore, but you only have to make this permanent connection once. With just one of the longer screws in place, I removed the smaller and checked the overall idea of this design choice. It looked perfect to me. Now onto the task of making this permanent by inserting all of the bolts and washers. Using the original arm in this manner saved me money by allowing me to not have to buy a separate table-mounted lighting system. Once you have finished this setup, you have almost completed this build. The only steps left are to mount everything to the adapters and test to make sure the weight of the monitor towards the rear is not too much because of the longer arm on one side, and to test to make sure that the other arm with the merge adapters can handle the lighting system hanging over the tabletop. Once this is verified, you just have to figure out where to place the wiring and how to plug things together in a safe manner away from the heat of the griddle. You must also be aware of placing the main power cord away from or underneath of the tabletop in a way which protects the electrical connection from any liquids which may be spilled and or splattered on or from the tabletop. Now this Subida or Sebiter dual LED ring light with tripod and phone holder does not come with a quick light attachment, as you can see. This system has a screw-on controller, which is necessary because of how the lighting arms move and can be positioned in just about any manner you need, as I already showed you earlier in this video. This means that the connection has to be stronger and more robust than a normal quick attachment light mount. This fact influenced my decision to include the entire controller and telescopic stand pole in this setup. Having such great access to the controller is convenient, as well as the ability to move the individual lights to almost any position above the tabletop. At first I was only going to use the one light, but as you will see, my mind was changed. Here I checked the centering of the light over the tabletop to make sure I could light the entire surface area. I checked from the front and the sides of the tabletop. I also moved the camera towards the middle of the tabletop to view where the light would be shining. The next part of this build is for those who would like to use a cell phone with this setup. I tried using my old camcorder in this setup, but it was too heavy for me to feel comfortable placing it inside of the light. Basically, I used the hot shoe flash-like adapter to connect my camcorder to the connection point inside of the light itself. I attached the supplied adapter first, then screwed the ball head adapter I removed from another adapter onto that. Yes, another adapter-on-adapter connection. This would allow me to move the camera independently of the light. If you use a cell phone, then this should not matter. The point is that wherever the camera is pointing, the light will also point at the same object or in the same general direction, whether your face or a tabletop. I carefully screwed the light onto the end of the camera arm and then pointed it downwards in the direction of the tabletop. After a final positioning of the light on the camera arm, it was time to run a USB extension wire under the tabletop to that light. This is the 6.5 foot long Amazon Basics USB-A 2.0 male to female extension cable that I used. I tried running the extension cable under the tabletop, but it did not seem to be long enough. However, I just needed to secure it around the poles before seeing how much was left to run underneath the tabletop. I could have used a 10-foot cable as well, but in the end, a design change would make this meaningless anyway. I positioned the lights so that the light on the left was slightly forward, left of center, and faced backwards towards the tabletop, while the light to the right was slightly right of center and pushed back while facing forward on the tabletop. This helped to eliminate any shadows which would produce areas of darkness in the video, causing a loss of detail which may be important to the viewer. The ball head adapter is not necessary when using a cell phone, and I chose not to use it for my camcorder because the camcorder was too heavy and unwieldy, making me feel a little uneasy about using it inside of the light. In the end, I would put both lights back on the light controller where they belonged and just use the metal arms to position the lights in the same manner as mentioned. Now I was ready to attach the monitor already on and working to the longer monitor arm. This would nearly complete the personal build. I just needed to verify the positioning of everything to make sure this build would be functional with the griddle in place. Though the wiring was not in its final place, I felt confident about the final position of most of the parts. I did, however, omit the camera arm mounted light in the end in favor of placing my camcorder on it by itself instead. Once again, if you were using a cell phone, then the light is designed for that purpose and not a bulky, heavy camcorder or camera. This setup pictured is good for cooking in my basement where I was originally set up. It has access from the right side of the tabletop. I also moved the tabletop setup around a lot to see what the vibrations would be like on all of the arms and how they were shaking, if at all. Here you can see the small amount of space around the griddle, which is just enough to put bowls and cooking utensils. Only a few more adjustments to prepare for moving to the upstairs kitchen and dining room. So I moved the camera arm to the right side of the tabletop with the light still attached in order to show you just how tall the camera arm can put the light and eventually the camcorder itself. I am 6 feet 2 inches tall in my socks, so this gives me an idea as to how high the camera mount will be from the tabletop. This setup with the camera arm on the right gives me access to the left, which is beneficial for working in my dining room and kitchen. I placed the camcorder on the end of the camera arm to test the picture and turned on the lights one at a time to check the light's coverage of the tabletop. To me, I needed to move the lights more to the right side. This would have to wait, though, until I finished dragging this setup all over my basement to test the connections, while also running over the cords to see how a little bump would shake things up. With both lights now connected to the light controller, I moved the tabletop around to show you what it looks like from a distance and how easily it would be to place a stool or a high chair in front to use this build as a computer table or a standing work area for any arts and craft work. As I move the monitor and lighting arms inwards, you can see how easily this setup can be literally put into a corner of your dining room or any room safely out of the way. So this is the final design of this build. Both lights are on the controller and centered. The camera arm puts the camcorder in a position so that it looks directly through the front light. It took some work and creativity, but this is awesome. I hope this build gives you many ideas as to how to customize and build your own desktop or compact tabletop studio setup. Thanks for watching.